Okay, how do you say that name? The one I pronounce as placenta.
It's
Placentia?
placentish.
Yeah, I mean, it'd probably be placentia.
Names.
Plachanto.
I don't think he comes back, so we don't have to worry too much about
He
Mr.
doesn't come back
Placenta.
yet.
All right, so we've got kind of like a two-parter in this one. We have Capulet in Paris. In the first section, Paris is talking about how much he wants to marry Juliet. And Capulet is being a, perhaps surprisingly decent father. He's like, she's not even 14. She's too young. Give it a couple years, but you can talk to her, woo her, start dating her, whatever, but I don't want her to get married yet. Paris kind of accepts that. He's going to go to the party and meet Juliet. They give the serving man a list of names, but he cannot read, so he approaches the first people he can see to read the list for him. This just so happens to be Romeo. Romeo finds that the girl that he has such a big crush on, Rosalind, is coming to this party. Now, of course, it's at Capulet's house, which is dangerous and not ideal, but he's going to go anyway because he loves Rosalind so much. And Benvolio is going to try to prove to him that he only likes Rosalind because he's never seen her compared to other women. And Benvolio thinks that other women are actually prettier than Rosalind. Romeo just has to kind of meet other women. We also have on the list Mercutio is invited and Tybalt. And one moment that I had to look up because it was kind of confusing is when they talk about the plantain leaf. So there's actually two plants called plantain. One is like big bananas that you may know about. That's not this.
That's not this.
Now in England, there's a tiny, or maybe, I don't know where it actually is, but there's a tiny herb somewhere in Europe called a plantain, and it was a medicinal herb. So that's one thing. And then secondly, broken shin was slang for broken heart. So,
Why?
I don't know, but...
She broke up with me. Ow! Oh no! What?
I mean, I think we can all appreciate the fact that people were crushing cups way back
That's
in
the part that
Shakespeare's
I
day.
was so happy about.
I love that.
I'm
gonna bring that back.
As a random note, I love so much the irony of the serving man who can't read and goes to Romeo and asks him if he can read. And Romeo's like, of course I can read. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's all to set up him looking at the invitation, seeing Rosaline. And then when he goes there, spoiler, he's going to see Juliet. And everything he was so certain about is actually totally wrong.
Oh, you can't read?
No, the serving man?
Serving man can't read.
Correct. Saying that asking me to read this note is like asking a painter to draw up fish or a fisher to draw a masterpiece. I can't read.
He's really poetic about how much he can't read.
Honestly, he seems pretty sanguine about it. Like he's saying, like, man, that's a stupid request. He doesn't seem embarrassed about not being able to read.
It's a fair point, though. I mean, like, so Capulet does it so casually. He's like, here, get these people. He doesn't even stop to think that this serving man, it wasn't super common for the lower classes to know how to read, but he just doesn't even cross his mind. He's like, here, get these people. He's like,
serving man's like, I'm on it, sir.
Yeah.
What?
I think that's a point worth bringing up, though, that not literate doesn't mean dumb if someone didn't have access to education. Like, even though it's funny to us now that this man can't read, since pretty much everyone has basic literary skills, if someone does not have access to an education, like, education is not the same as intelligence. So this guy's not dumb.
With that context, it's almost like a dig at Capulet. Like, it's kind of like a Arrested Development thing. Like, he is so rich and involved in all these circles, he can't fathom that somebody doesn't know how to read. Like, how much would a banana cost? $10 sort of thing.
Do you think that was written as like a relatable aside to some of the people in the audience who probably didn't know how to read?
Actually,
maybe.
Probably to some extent. I mean, we were kind of talking about sort of the class divide at the Globe Theater, where you'd have the rich people up in the boxes and the poor people down on the floor. So in this case, I think setting up as a joke that kind of works for both of the audiences present. You can't have the rich people sitting up in the box laughing about the illiterate servant, and then the poor people down on the floor being like, there. Look at this idiot.
And when he asks him, can you read? And Romeo goes, mine own fortune and my misery. He's saying that like kind of sarcastically, like, I'm so miserable, how could there be anything good? But in his misery, the letter does contain his fortune, which is Juliet, the one he actually loves. And the serving man's like, can you read anything you see? Like, skeptical. And that's exactly what the audience feels at this point too. Like, Romeo, are you actually aware of what's going on? And Romeo's like, yeah, if I know the letters and the language. And it's like, yeah, you know the meaning, Romeo, of what you're saying.
You know what
It's one of those great like meta textual scenes that Shakespeare loves doing. It's like the breaking the fourth wall almost with his turning to the audience and being like, what's up, guys?
What's up, guys?
And I like too. I didn't even think of this until you said Placentio. Not to bring this back, but the names in the letter, we have Valentine, then Signor Valentio, and you could argue that Placentio, like a placenta, obviously arises with a pregnancy. So like these are all kind of related to love, sex, marriage, etc. Which
Rosaline, a rose,
Boom.
Tybalt. That's probably fun.
There's also a Helena, like a Helen of Troy.
The two moments in the scene that I thought were the most modern and relatable was the one we talked about, which is the serving man going, man, my boss gives me an impossible task. What am I going to do? Tell him I can't do it? No, I want to get paid. And then the next is Benvolio actually being like, look, I get that you're love struck, but that's just because you saw a woman. Benvolio isn't trying to get Romeo to obsessively attach to a new woman. He's trying to get him to like, not just fixate. And of course, Romeo, he just swings his attention, all of it back onto Juliet and off of Rosaline.
Benvolio's is trying to be a bro. Like, man, there's plenty of fish in the sea.
I will make you think if I swan or crow. Like, he's saying it in a pretty rough way of like, oh, you'll see that actually Rosaline's ugly.
Yeah. There's a little sprinkling of misogyny.
Well, gotta have a little.
Talk about Paris, younger than she are happy mother's maid. His one confident line to Capulet, talking about his 13-year-old daughter.
Yikes.
Which I will say there's a part of that though where, because that's something that comes up. I'm sure we've all seen period dramas and things like that where the young age of marriage is something that comes up very much. But if you look back through history, that actually wasn't common outside of rich families. Even in Italy in the Renaissance, like if you were just a poor working person working a trade, you probably weren't getting married until at least your late teens, early 20s. Because you have to save up money, you're still working. So I do think if that's also like that's definitely something that the audience in Elizabethan and later Jacobean England would be like, "Ah, man, that sucks."
Okay.
Yeah, I remember reading something about that too, that even in the nobility, the marriages would happen, but they wouldn't actually be completed until later. Like if people were married too young, because we have this idea of people in the past being dumb, or at least not as knowledgeable as we are about certain things like reproduction, but they did know that if you get pregnant too young, that's bad because you're not developed enough to give birth safer, knowing that they wouldn't have done it that early. I think this is meant to be gross to people back then as it is to us now.
Yeah, like I think then as now, this is a moment it's like, man, Paris is pushy, creepy, like mid-20s guy being like, hey, age of consent is only 13 with parental approval.
Technically.
It does make Romeo look better in comparison, especially because they get married. They're being dumb, but they feel they have to. Like, they feel they don't have another choice but to get married, whereas Paris is kind of pushing it. Paris can wait a couple years, and that is the plan for quite a while. But he wants to get married right now to this middle schooler. I think even Capulet saying, calling her my child and not my daughter emphasizes that a little bit. She's a child.
Well, what do we think about him being named Paris? Most famously, the most disastrous courtship / abduction of all time.
Yeah, we hate it.
So you have Paris, who is named after basically a pagan or pre-Christian figure, compared to Romeo professing his love in terms comparing it to Christian faith. You have when the devout religion of mine eye maintains such falsehood, and these who often drowned could never die. Talking about crying, but also comparing his eyes to the baptized and finding eternal life. In this case, not for Juliet, but he is still comparing the truth and passion of his love to the one true faith of God.
I love
You
the
want
lines where he's like, "Oh, I'm not mad, but I'm bound more than a madman is. I'm shut up in prison, kept without my food, and whipped and tormented." And bro, like, I'm sorry that your girlfriend broke up with you.
I also
Saw her fair, none else being by.
it's so fair for Benvolio to say that because Romeo is being crazy. He says,
Yeah.
like, for your broken heart. Romeo's literally setting himself up by asking questions that Benvolio's going to be like, Romeo, what are you talking about? I don't know anymore.
Point being, people then as now are basically the same. We've just benefited from thousands of years of economic shifts and scientific discoveries. But people basically the same and basically want the same things.
Yeah, have the same sense of humor.
Mhm.
Still can barely read.
Like
Yeah.
if you like Fall Out Boy.
Watch
Subscribe.
next episode.
Right here. Click on my face.
That's it. Christina's gonna do that.
I can't do that. It doesn't
Christina
allow
can't
it
do
anymore.
Christina can't do that anymore. Well, guys.
The more you
Sorry.
claim you can't do it, the more it's going to keep cropping up.
Comments below if you can teach me how to do it, because
Yeah. Crush that bell like you're gonna crush someone after this video.
Crush that like button.